Was the song in the year 2525, which was written in 1969. People have been making predictions about the future for as long as humanity has existed. They're entertaining to contemplate. And if they come true, one ensures their posthumous reputation as a prophet. In 1848, Karl Marx and Frederich Engels predicted that capitalism would fall apart and that working class revolutions would sweep the world. Thousands of years before that, the book of Revelation posited the events of the end times. And along the way, people like Nostradamus, the 16th century French astrologer, wrote hundreds of quatrains, 4 lines of rhyming verses about the future. Some say that he even predicted the French Revolution, 9/11, and COVID-19. I've recently become fascinated by how people a century or half a century ago conjectured about the time which we live in now. Today, let's explore some of those predictions and how eerily prescient many of them are. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, welcome to Timeless. I hope that you're doing great. As always, it's great to be with you. Timeless airs Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays here on this channel, the Julie Hartman YouTube channel, at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. So please do always check that out. Also, I do these Julie Noted news videos throughout the week, and you can also catch Dennis and Julie on this channel every Monday, also at 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern. And you can download the show on Apple and Spotify if you would prefer to listen. We've done a lot of really interesting subjects on this show, Timeless. I've talked about history of various countries such as China, India, Iran. We've even done histories of coronations and papal death ceremonies. I've interviewed ex-CIA and FBI agents. I've interviewed someone who is a graphologist, aka a handwriting expert. We've talked about hookup culture, the flags of other countries and their symbolism, gambling, how TV advertising has changed over time, weddings, funerals, symbolism on American money. So it's really been fun to cover all of these topics. And I've got a great one for you today. And that is, how did people in the past predict the moment that we're living in now? As I talked about in the introduction, people have been making predictions for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But it's interesting to look at people who were sort of close to our era, i.e. those at the end of the 19th century and throughout the 20th century, who were close but who weren't quite there, and how they saw the evolution of society unfolding. Because for a lot of time, society was the same for people over centuries and centuries and centuries. You lived in a way that was no different than how your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents lived. That all started to change starting, I would say, in the 1700s, where technology started to ramp up. The pace of innovation started to increase. And then 1800s, 1900s, it was clear that with each decade, there was a new life-changing piece of technology that was going to fundamentally alter the way of your life as compared to the people before you. Think about cars, trains, airplanes. All of those are inventions of the past 150 to 200 years. So people at the end of the 1800s and throughout the 1900s, they knew that things were changing really fast. And they had, I think, some particularly prescient observations and predictions about the future. So we're going to be looking at some of those positive predictions, and then we're going to be discussing, well, what did they see that we, even now, in the time that we're in, can't see about the way the technology may have crippled us. But first, a quick note about the power of imagination. One of my favorite commencement addresses ever delivered was J.K. Rowling's at Harvard in 2008. By the way, as you know from another Timeless show where I talked about commencement addresses, a lot of them are really terrible these days. They just talk about political, woke stuff. But if you want to check out a really good one, Google J.K. Rowling's Harvard 2008 commencement. And she talked about the power of imagination. And she said, what a beautiful thing imagination is, because it allows us to put ourselves in other positions that we're not living in. Imagination allows us to feel empathy for those who are experiencing something that is different from what we are experiencing. And that is certainly true. It is one of the great instruments in the human toolkit. But I would add a little asterisk to J.K. Rowling's point and say that as powerful as the imagination is, it also has some great limits. And by the way, those limits aren't necessarily bad things. It is really difficult to fully imagine the way that other people live. You may be able to somewhat conceptualize it, which is what J.K. Rowling is saying is so great, but you really can't fully put yourself in someone else's shoes. And as I just said, that actually, I think, is a good thing for us, because if we had total empathy, if we really understood the way that other people live, we probably wouldn't be able to function. We would be so upset and saddened by some of the things that people had to endure. For instance, it's kind of a blessing that we can't conceptualize the pain that people went through in the Holocaust, because if we really understood that, we would never be able to move on. So it's this interesting, conflicting, dual nature of our imaginative abilities that both lend to these great things like empathy, but also protect ourselves from falling into the depths of just living in the past and not understanding the future. So I think we ought to understand the limits of our imagination. And that will lead us to intellectually remembering or considering, if not emotionally considering, that we are living in an amazing age. It's difficult for us to imagine how much more difficult people's lives were decades earlier. But again, we should be able to intellectually understand that we have so many privileges. That's the word that's thrown around a lot these days: white privilege, male privilege, cis privilege, etc. We have so many privileges in technology, efficiency, convenience that many people didn't have. Our great grandparents, even our grandparents, if they could know, well, presumably if your grandparents are still alive, they would know. Only one of mine is still alive. But I think about my deceased grandparents, and if they could know the splendors of the modern world that I am engaging in, they would have been so thrilled. A lot of the inventions that we enjoy are so recent. We don't even realize how recent they are. For instance, antibiotics. We take that as a given of modern America. Did you know that antibiotics were not actually put on the market for widespread use until the 1940s? And it was because of World War II. There were so many diseases that many of our American soldiers were getting that it spurred the invention of antibiotics. By the way, there's another historical event which impelled the invention of something that we all find to be useful. That is embalming. Sorry to keep shouting out timeless episodes, but I also did a timeless episode on burial practices. And I talked about how in the Civil War, there were so many American soldiers who were dying far from home, and their families wanted their bodies to be transported back to the town that they were living in, but bodies very quickly decay and start to smell and start to rot. So President Abraham Lincoln actually gave a grant to someone who was experimenting with embalming. And that's how embalming came to be widespread in American culture. So that's the same thing with World War II and antibiotics. Before antibiotics, it was quite customary for people to have children or brothers or sisters or parents who prematurely died. I'm sure that all of us, I know this is true of my family, I'm sure it's true of your family, have people in your not so distant history who died. My grandmother's sister, for instance, died of pneumonia. That was just a given reality of modern life until the advent of antibiotics. Can you imagine people just 100 years ago, if they could know that so many of the diseases that they feared would be able to be cut off or at least mitigated by the presence of this extraordinary medicine? They would just be aghast at our splendor. How about the communication that we are so lucky to engage in? You know, we often view technology as a curse, and we're going to talk about that in this episode. But let's take a moment to appreciate how easy it is for us to communicate with someone. There were 200 years ago, if you wanted to communicate with a relative who was living across the country, you would often wonder if they were dead or alive, because you'd have to send a letter, and it may take 6 months for a year for them to get your letter and to return a letter. That was a reality very recently in our future. And it has changed so much that we don't even conceptualize that people used to live this way. But let us not forget that it used to be extraordinarily difficult to communicate with people who were not in your immediate vicinity. And by immediate vicinity, I literally mean like in your own home. Even the telephone, in the 80s, they used to charge you for long distance phone calls. Long distance phone calls meant anything outside of your area code. We've now come into a time where you can make international calls or across the country calls free of charge. Look at air travel, car travel. I'm putting up a picture here, picture 6, of Leonardo da Vinci's 1493 drawing of an aerial screw. People for centuries imagined what it would be like if you could efficiently fly into the sky and traverse across hundreds of miles without having to go on horseback, without having to go in, a buggy for a really long time. We're in that time now. It's amazing. If you want to go to Tel Aviv and you're in Los Angeles, you get on a flight and you're there in 14 hours. Gosh, we are so lucky. Let's look at music. Back in the day, as in 40 years ago in the 80s, you would have to have a Walkman or a CD to listen to music. Go out and buy one. CDs weren't invented until the 1980s. Now you can go on YouTube and just look up, whatever music you want to hear, download it on your phone and hear it instantaneously. Prior to the era of the Walkman and the CDs, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to play it yourself, or you had to travel to listen to an opera or go to a music concert. That's amazing that you really had to go to great effort to something that nowadays we can just access with the swipe of a button. That's true of music. That's true of many different kinds of entertainment and information. I even remember it. I'm 23 years old. I remember growing up, my dad would take us to Blockbuster to buy movies. And you'd have to go out, buy the movie, go home, put it in the whatever console we had, and watch it. Or you'd have to go to the movie theater and watch it. Now you can just get it right on your laptop. Think about the books that we can just log on the internet to, find, and have them at our doorstep the next morning. We have such access to information. If we want to know what's going on in any corner of the world, we can Google it. We can see pictures of what's going on in Australia. We can see videos of what's going on in China. We can watch the TV channels of those various parts of the world. I keep going on to impart to you that we have so much that we ought to appreciate, so much convenience and efficiency and splendor. Even, again, I'm continuing to go on, and believe it or not, I'm giving you the abbreviated version of all the conveniences. Computers, typewriters. My mom talks about in high school how if she needed to turn in a paper, she'd have to go on a typewriter. That seems like ancient history to us. But we are lucky enough to be living in a time where all of that is at our convenience. So let's look back at the way that some people predicted the future, and you will see the excitement and the sense of awe at things that we just take for granted. Let's start with clip 4. This is someone in 1964 predicting the fact that we could instantly communicate and even be able to work remotely.
The communication satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London.
How obvious and interesting does that seem to us now? But you see, he's imagining this crazy world where this might be possible. It's here for us. Lucky us. Let's go to clip 5, where someone in 1974 was talking about how one day a computer would fit on your desk.
I brought along my son Jonathan, who in the year 2001 will be the same age as I am now. Maybe he will be better adjusted to this kind of world that you're trying to portray.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs for his everyday life, like his bank statements, his theater reservations, all the information you need in the course of living in a complex modern society. This will be in a compact form in his own house.
And then here's someone in 1989. It's a TV program imagining what homes would be like in the year 2020. Clip 3.
What are going to be the biggest changes in our homes by 2020? Will the house of the future protect the environment? And what new technology do researchers think we'll be living with? Well, we've been talking to some of the people who've been thinking about the home of the future. Christine McNulty. Once all the clutter of technology has gone, you'll be able to furnish your rooms in any style you like. You won't actually be able to see the technology, but it will be there, doing its job without getting in your way.
That means the lights automatically switch off and on as you walk between rooms. And the home learns how bright you like them. A simple command gives you music, perhaps piped in from a sound library. Bark, please. And no more PowerPoints. Plugs become pads, picking up power from anywhere on the wall.
So this person was wrong about the hairdryer that you could just put on the wall. Maybe that's true in some parts of the United States. I don't know, at least not in my home. But these things that we just view as a given, clapping and having the lights turn on, or having a computer where you can make reservations. These are things that people thought were just unimaginable in how splendorous they would be. And yet we take them for granted. We don't even recognize our privilege in possessing these certain things. But the great question is, are we happier as a result? We're so lucky, we're so privileged, we're so advantaged in many ways that we don't even think about. But yet we see, especially in the United States, that there are record high numbers of depression, a record high number of people, especially young people, are medicated. The suicide rate is at an all-time high in this country. And so how can it be possible that we are in every quantifiable way advantaged, and yet we are clearly feeling as if we are very disadvantaged? Well, these prophets, as I call them, these people who predicted the future, were eerily prescient because they both predicted certain practical things, such as a computer and the abilities of a computer, but they also predicted how we would feel amidst all of this advancement. Let's go to clip 2. These are children in 1966 who were asked, what do you think life is going to be like in the year 2000? They were spot on about our boredom and our conventionality.
I think it'll be very dull, and people would all be squashed together so much there won't be any fun or anything. And people will be rationed to the amount of things they can have, because if they had too many things it would just squash their houses and there just wouldn't be room for them.
I think it'll be people will be regarded more as statistics than as actual people.
I don't think it's going to be so nice. I think sort of all machines everywhere, everyone doing everything for you. You know, you'll get all bored, and I don't think it'll be so nice.
I think it's going to be very boring, and everything will be the same. I mean, people will be the same, and things will be the same.
How did those school children know? Isn't that fascinating? If you asked a lot of people today what you think the source of their insecurity or their malaise is, they would not be able to identify as well as those school children 60 years ago were able to identify the sources of their dissatisfaction. They saw that technology would be a blessing in many ways, but would be as much of a curse because it would take away a lot of our agency in certain tasks. Again, we are so blind to this, but people in the future, even though they didn't even know this reality, somehow we're aware. Let's look at this painting from 1911, so over 100 years ago. It's called We'll Be Happy Then, picture 7. It shows these personal robotic servants. We see one on the right that is in human form, and then we see all these contraptions and devices surrounding this guy. And this central figure is sitting on some kind of contraption that is very comfortable, because you see his legs are propped up, almost like he's at a salon getting some kind of massage. You see on the right that there is a big opera speaker, so he can hear the opera at any time. On the left, there is a news speaker, so he can hear any timely development at any time. Above him, there is sunlight, manufactured sunlight shining over him, so that if he does not want to go outside, he doesn't have to go outside. And yet, you look at all of these things that are very convenient, and then turn your attention to his face. He looks sullen. He looks disappointed and unhappy. His face isn't jubilant and enthusiastic, like, oh my gosh, I can literally pull in a device that's giving me sunlight without having to go outside, lucky me. No, there's something that is deeply dissatisfying to him. Someone in 1911 could see that much into the future to know that despite all of this stuff around us, we would somehow not be fulfilled by it. What we're about to look at next is a painting from 1930. It is an unattributed artist, unfortunately, and also we don't know the title of it, but people are just referring to it as a painting from 1930 showing the future. And it shows people, this is picture 8, looking into devices, it seems, and they're able to talk with people. Boy, that's a pretty great prediction of what FaceTime is. I mean, it looks a little different. They clearly didn't get AirPods right, because the things that they're listening to are connected to the device with a wire. But they somehow were able to predict that you'd be able to talk with people and even see their face into a device. And yet, in this painting, you see that people are removed from one another. You're sitting across the table from someone. You're not even looking at them. There's someone in the background who's carrying drinks, looking over at the women who are, as I like to say, FaceTiming, trying to get their attention. The women are totally oblivious. So this painting, I think, was meant to be perhaps not a satire, but more of a revelation of how siloed and segregated we would be from one another. Here's another one, picture 9, at school. This is what the painting is called. It is from 1899. That people are predicting the way that information will be conveyed. And so we see this teacher on the right, and he's operating this device, and he's putting books into this machine. And the books, through some electrical current, are transferring the knowledge into students' ears. They're wearing these devices, and they're somehow getting the knowledge. This up in the corner of the painting, for those who are watching, you can see it says in the year 2000. So this is what the painter in 1899 thought the 21st century would look like. Again, look at their faces. None of them seem happy. They all have these weird, creepy, sullen, dull expressions. And one of the pupils is looking out the window. That is a way of the artist conveying this efficiency, this advancement is not going to be enough. People are going to be bored. They're going to be looking out to something else, trying to get more out of life than just this rapid transference of information. And then the final picture I'll show you is called A Chemical Dinner Party by the same artist, also painted in 1899. We have these fancy people sitting around a table. They're beautiful, at least in the case of females, outfits, gorgeous hairstyles, resplendent jewelry, and they're all eating a dish of a singular pill. That's all they're eating, a pill. And this also says in the corner, the year 2000. As I mentioned, it's from the same artist, and he just did these various predictions of life in the 21st century. He thought that in the 21st century, we would be able to be so efficient that people wouldn't need to eat these large meals. They would just be able to get all of the nutrients, all of the protein that they needed by just swallowing a pill. So again, it's a kind of satire where you have all of the markings of a great evening with the items and the jewelry and the fanciness, the butler of the dinner party, and yet it's so diminished because people are just eating this one pill. So it shows that people even back then knew that technology was going to cripple us as much as it has helped us. But this does not have to be the case. You know, as I mentioned, all of this happened so fast. Literally in the 80s was when CDs were first invented. The iPhone wasn't invented until like 15 years ago, less than 15 years ago. Social media wasn't invented until about a decade ago. Instagram was founded in 2012. So we are experiencing unprecedented growth in this one era of life when literally for millennia, centuries, things were no different from centuries before. Now things by the year are radically different from how they were. And so we don't really, it seems, have a guidebook as to how to deal with this. We're just trying to appreciate and react to this onslaught, but we really don't know how. The thing though is that we do actually have a guidebook. And there's a story in particular that I'm going to get to in a moment that I think is as prophetical as those painters or those children predicting the future in showing us how to deal with advancement, how to temper it in a way that is achievable. But we look at what technology has done to us, and no wonder we are so depressed and we are so diminished in our lives. It doesn't have to be this way, but we have allowed technology to bring out many of the worst parts of our being and not amplify some of the best parts. What technology is supposed to do is make your life easier, more efficient, more convenient, so that you have the leisure time to go out and be the best possible version of yourself. But instead, we are allowing this technology to do the opposite, to transform us into more diminished and worse beings than we were. For instance, technology has allowed us to be segregated from one another. We could use technology to become closer, and in some ways we do with FaceTime, long-term phone calls, connecting with people from social media. But we also take advantage of that by just FaceTiming people, just calling people, not going out and going out to dinner with them, by scrolling endlessly on social media. This is supposed to be used as a tool to unlock greater parts of existence in life, but we are allowing it to just make us worse. We are allowing technology to make us lazy. The amount of information that we are able to access should actually make us harder working because it will make research more efficient. No longer do you have to go to your public library and learn how to read, what was it, like what was that system in libraries called? The Dewey Decimal System. See, I'm too young to even remember it. I vaguely remember learning it in like second grade. You had to know the Dewey Decimal System 40 years ago. If you wanted a book, go to the section of the library with the name of the author, comb through all the books, find it, check it out. We're so lucky. We can just go on the internet and order a book or look up the synopsis of something and get information right at our fingertips. That should enable us to do more, to grow our intellect at a faster pace. But instead, we are relying on that convenience to just make us dumber and go, oh, well, I can just get this information, right now and great, done. I wrote my essay, I found my source, I'm going to go play video games. That's not what it should be used for. We're allowing technology to make us more narcissistic. Look at our social media profiles. Those profiles are supposed to be connecting us to one another, and we are essentially using them as a forum to broadcast our greatness, to broadcast what vacation we were on or how skinny we are, or this great, party that we went to. In every single way, there seems to be this inversion. There are so many more examples. I'll just name two more. We are allowing technology to legitimize our impulses instead of working to have them contained. We now have this technology where if you want to, you can order Uber Eats. It can be right at your door. Pizza deliverers weren't even a thing until like the 70s or the 80s, let alone Postmates and Uber Eats, which we have now. You can have your impulses be gratified by instantaneous gambling or instantaneous online shopping or instantaneous porn or weed delivery or alcohol delivery. If you wanted to watch pornography in the latter half of the 21st century and even the beginning, or the 20th century and even the beginning of the 21st century, you'd have to get in your car, drive to an adult movie theater and watch it there, or go to an adult film store. And there was a stigma surrounding that because you didn't want to be seen in public buying pornography. Now with technology, there's no longer that stigma of fearing that you will be seen in public buying a certain item, or there's no longer the barrier of time and money and energy that you don't want to get in your car and drive 20 minutes and spend the money buying the tape. And it makes these things much easier to satisfy our impulses and succumb to instant gratification instead of containing it. We need to keep this advent of technology in its place. That's what all the prophets in the paintings and in the videos are showing us. I really hope that technology will sort of have the same trajectory as cigarettes. You know, cigarettes were very common and it was widely used and accepted as a social fad. And then over time, people started to see that nicotine actually really wasn't that good for you. And there was this stigma associated with smoking. I really hope that will be the case with technology. That right now we're in the era where it's cool and it's convenient and it's great, but then we will come to see that it actually is doing more harm for us than that instant gratification is allowing. Because the thing with laziness or instant pleasures is that it is always good in the moment, but it is never good long term. That is true of technology as well. So I mentioned that there actually is kind of a guidebook for how to deal with this. We think there isn't because all around us is so unprecedented. But there are actually, dare I say, timeless sources of wisdom that we can draw from and apply to the changing world of the modern day. There are so many prophecies that people make, as mentioned, whether it's, Marx and Engels or the Book of Revelation or that thinker in the 16th century in France. But there are also these prophecies like John Kerry saying that global warming and climate change is going to radically alter and transform our world. John Kerry was among the people in the 1980s and 1990s who said, you just wait, in a decade or two, the world is going to be, uninhabitable. And it turns out that those prophecies were not true. We focus on a lot of things that aren't true, and we still believe that they may come true. But we don't focus on prophecies that actually were true. It's this weird inversion. We follow the things that were false and we reject the things that are true. There was a prophecy about the role that technology would play in our life. And that comes from chapter 11 of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Christian, if you're non-religious, a-religious, atheist, whatever. The Bible, in addition to being a religious text, is also just a great source of wisdom and life lessons outside of your religious or non-religious affiliation. And in chapter 11 of Genesis, they talk about technology being built at such a fast pace and what it might do to people. For instance, we look here at the story, and it says that there were these people who were building a tower to, quote, make a name for themselves. That was the reason why people were engaging in this rapid technological sophistication and advancement. And God looks down and he sees all these people who want to make a name for themselves, and he recognizes that it is not a good thing. And in Genesis it says, if as one people with one language for all, this is how they have begun to act, then nothing that they propose to do will be out of their reach. And then God decides to confound their language so that all these people are speaking different dialects and they don't have the convenience of coming together and building a tower to heaven. So when people read that story, they think that it is a philosophical, religious explanation of how we have different languages and different dialects. I actually think that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that God saw that building for the sake of building, making things better, more resplendent, more efficient, for the sake of it, would lead to something bad. In other words, technological advancement ought to come alongside and be spurred by wisdom. yes, we have the ability to keep inventing, and we're seeing that now with artificial intelligence. We are getting to the place where we can tell a machine to write an essay for us or to give us some piece of information. But what the Tower of Babel story teaches us is that just because we can doesn't mean that we should. Technological advancement for the sake of making a name for ourselves is just not a good thing. It's going to lead to more malaise and more unhappiness and more destruction than we may think. So it's not that we should throw away our phones and our computers and never go on these things again, but we ought to use it in its proper place, put it in its proper place. And the only way that we can do that is if we have a perspective about the ways that it is harming us, in addition to making our lives way better. Thank you so much for joining me. Please hit the subscribe button down below if you want to stay notified of all of the different episodes I post, whether it's Dennis and Julie on Mondays, Timeless Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, and Julie Noted throughout the week. You can also email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. Take care, everyone. Get off your phones, and I'll see you soon.